Hi everyone, this is Arpad from the YouTube channel Starpath Academy. And today I want to talk about another nail in the coffin of the US dollar as the global reserve currency. And that's the nail in the coffin allegory or whatever it is, metaphor. I took that from Mike Maloney, who has been preaching this for, I don't know, probably 8 years or more. And I think, he's always good on making the points and connecting the dots. But I think we're really getting closer now. And I don't say this easily because I think, first of all, we have to differentiate the American system, the country of the United States, and the people who use the military of the United States for globalist ends. I think we have to differentiate between the two. And people name it different ways and point to different direction, but what is important that we make the differentiation, right? Because we call ourselves the leader of the free world, and that has been true for a long time in the sense of the ideas of liberty, right? The classical liberal ideology has been spread for a long time and worked itself into almost every country, thanks to the United States and the leaders of the United States. May that be sometimes through warfare, and may that be sometimes through US propaganda. Whatever the ways, and we can debate whether that's a good thing or not, we can say that classical American liberalism has worked its way into almost every country in the world, right? It's there. And the problem is that right now, the people who use the US might for the globalist agenda they no longer care about liberalism, liberty, and classical liberal ideas. They still want the effect of a hegemony, but they want to unmarry that from US ideology, which was personal freedom, right? So now we're thinking of, a lot of people are rooting for the US and a lot of people are rooting against the US. The issue is that it's going to end up in a big confusion unless you separate the two goals. One is the prosperity of the United States as a country and the people, all the people inside of it, and the other is the globalist, elitist idea of working through central banks into the monetary system of countries, right? So it's very different. It's very different because when you read some of the comments that are under my YouTube videos, they sometimes talk about, well, the US has been abusing their power overseas and they've been installing puppet governments. Well, is that the US? What do you mean by the US? Is that you? Is that me? Is that the US citizen, Joe, Schmo, six pack, right? Is that Lucy down the street? They have been doing that, right? So of course not. That's not the case. And unfortunately, when people speak against US foreign intervention, they talk against the United States as if we had a say in it, right? So we have to differentiate that, absolutely. Now, the point that I wanted to make, to come back to, is the nail in the coffin, is that, of course, the BRICS countries, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are now more and more moving, especially with the push of Russia. Makes sense, and I'll talk why. they're trying to come up with a gold backed type of currency exchange between themselves. Now, of course, the system that we have now, right, made sense for a long time, right? That the US dollar has been, so to speak, the de facto global currency when it comes to international trade, because you can always redeem the US dollars for US products and goods and services, right? And that made total sense for a very long time because the US has been the primary producer of things, right? Very early on, later arms, if nothing else. Or you could always use that to pay off the other country, and they could always trade that for either, right, oil through Saudi Arabia or some of these countries, right, that love to have or love to hold US debt, and I say love in quotes, of course. They were ordered to at some point. But now, as for better or worse, as the US grip on the world is weakening, right? Other countries are becoming more bolder and bolder to ditch the US dollar, even partially. Even our good friend Israel and Saudi Arabia and some other countries have been doing that, right? Definitely when it comes to trade with China, right? When it comes to trade with Russia and so on and so forth, they don't no longer need to do that. And this has been eating up some of the deflation because this is sort of a very heavy inflationary cost on the US dollar because people are finding no worth in it in the sense of the international trade from the international trade perspective, right? So that is quite inflationary, right? If countries like Japan and China and some other countries are trying to sell a US debt, right? Now, we can absorb that, right? We can always just absorb that and print money and turn it into inner debt, basically, because it's all just numbers. The problem is not the numbers game that indicates the issue. They can always solve. You have to know this. They can always work out the books somehow. The problem is, it's never that, oh, there's the numbers too big and now we can't deal with it. But the actual physical consequences of that, how that trickles down into the economy, right? And you can see that by looking at the US cities becoming worse and worse for the last few years now, right? The quality of life, especially among the very poor classes of people, it's becoming horrible. So hopefully that will change soon. I don't know, but anyway. So back to the conversation. The issue is that ditching the US dollar has always been punished in history. If you take a look at Saddam, right, him not wanting to trade his oil, the country of Iraq's oil, exclusively in dollars, or when it comes to Gaddafi with his gold-backed African currency, right? Whenever things like that, even as ideas come up, right, they're suddenly punished, right? The issue is that when it comes to the Ukraine crisis or conflict, right, the US has not been all that effective. Let's just put it that way. So that is showing some weakness in the US. Now, do you want more arms in the Ukraine? Do you want less? That's not the point here. The point is that the US needs to show now more and more cards, and they're just not, the threats are not having the effect that they used to have maybe 10, 15 years ago, right? Because the world has been shifting has been shifting into multipolar world, definitely when it comes to China, right, and some other countries as well. Now, and some of you may be thinking, well, this is a great thing, right? Because the US hegemony is weakening and it's been bringing a lot of pain and suffering for countries. Well, I just want to put a quick pause on that, because for better or worse, the US hegemony and the power that came with the US empire that we sometimes talk negatively against, right? That had the added benefit of classical liberal ideas penetrating countries, right? So at least you had that, because if another country, pick any country, would have been playing that role, the value system that would have been penetrating the other countries would be very different, right? When it comes to massive surveillance, China's the leader, right? So when this void is appearing, somebody will need to fill that void. And it's not going to be all roses and butterflies, that's what I'm saying. The problem is that the classical liberal ideas of the United States have been hijacked anyway. So even if you would root for the current system, the current empire, you would no longer get the penetration of liberty and freedom and those ideas that we may have been on the route 20 years ago, right? Things have changed, shifted tremendously, right? When it comes to what type of agendas are being pushed here in Western Europe on young people, especially, especially young men, it's not something that other countries would want to take on as a recipe, let's just say it that way. And for good reasons, right? Because they see the results of it. They see the results of the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, right? So now we're coming to a chessboard that I'm not necessarily saying power is weakening, because the US military might, I think, is still way ahead when it comes to technology, right? The issue is technology doesn't necessarily always win wars, right? And we'll go back to wars a little bit. The issue is sometimes the cheap, massively produced ammunition with good logistic transported there in time when in need, and massive amounts of it, can also yield great results. And if you think about the Second World War, the German army was way ahead of its time when it came to, the Russian army, right? The Red Army, or even other armies in Europe, right? And it gives you a lot of advantages, but when it comes to the end, it all boils down to logistics and resources. Logistics and resources. Now, sure, can you take out, headquarters? Okay. It does matter, right? But in a long enough duration, different things matter. And it almost always comes down to resource management. If you ever played any strategy game on a computer, you will know, right? So it goes back to Machiavelli, right? And I think what he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that war is inevitable, and it can only be, peace can only just prolong it, right? Push it into a later time, to the benefit of the enemy. So basically, if you're a hegemon and you have the power now, it's best to make a war now, right? But that has a cost. So we have to watch out for things that might be unfolding in the next 5 years. But I think now, with 41 countries trying to join the BRICS, it's not going to be a slam dunk. And I think that's planned in the sense of whoever controls the might of the US Army will not want to take on all these countries, right? Because it can win over through mind control, and it can win over through um, the powers of money, right? Instead of making war. Actually, making war is the least efficient way of um, of winning an ideological battle, because that's what we're in. We're in an ideological battle between um, at least two things, right? And war is expensive, and looks like the seat of power is inclined to move away from the United States, especially because if it has the seat of power in the United States, it comes with an extra burden of liberty, which they don't really like, right? So if they can hold the same power through the military of other countries or through the surveillance system of other countries, why would they want to carry the burden of all these liberty-loving United States citizens that exert their power once the wealth of the other nation is siphoned into the country? Why not siphon it into a different country where the ideas of liberty have not been rooted so deeply, right? So that, when it comes to war, I did want to mention that it's sometimes fought for the reasons of controlling your own population, not necessarily taking land, not necessarily taking resources, but siphoning the resources from your own population up towards the elite of the same population. And because if you have the mentality of team A, team B, and they fight and one wins and yay, it's a very simplistic idea, and you have to wake up, right? There's no team A, right? A billionaire or super billionaire in the United States will have a really good conversation with a super billionaire in China or in Russia, right? And they will have nothing in common with you, even if you are US citizens. In fact, they most likely despise you. So there's no team A, team B, right? And that's what we're seeing in politics. And I don't want to quote too many people, but if you take a look at some aspects of right-leaning politics like Tucker Carlson, and some aspects of left-leaning politics like Jimmy Dore, right? And you can see them, waking up to the very similar ideas in real time. You can go in and you check out the Jimmy Dore show or something like that, and they're almost like frustrated why they're agreeing with these two sides, because they're still in the mentality of left right. Well, now they're not, I have to give them that, but for a long time they have been, right? And everyone is slowly waking up to the point you are being divided for a reason, right? And the reason is so that they can siphon wealth and productivity, specifically productivity, away from the lower classes, right? And we don't need to go into like ideologies of who's doing this or this class or that, not even talking about classes, but you have to understand that there are decision makers in a country, and then there's you, right? There's us. And if we get pushed into a war, who benefits is the people who produce the machinery for the war, and we pay for it. Whether that's money, whether that's inflation, taxes, stolen productivity, stolen future with debt, right? And even if they just put all the machinery and dump it into a pile and they burn it or, you know, push it into an endless war, what will happen is you get poorer, your life quality gets lowered, and those at the top, they benefit. Now, does this mean that there are no just causes of war? I don't know. It's not my thing to say, and that's not what I'm here to talk about. Does that mean that the people in Ukraine or Russia or any other country, do they not suffer? Should they not be helped in one way or another? I don't know. That's not what we're talking about. So don't hold it against me. I'm not here to pick sides or politicize. I want you to understand that right now the US has not been winning wars, even though they could win wars. And we may have a debate on this, right? Quite fast if they really wanted to. But they don't want to, because endless war is the goal, not for the US, but for those who control the might of the US Army, right? Which is good-hearted, in most cases, right? Good-hearted people who fight for their country, right? And in some way they are fighting. So it's not to speak against them. It's for us to wake up, right? It's for us to wake up that we have to say no to things, even though, well, it becomes easier. It becomes easier to say no to things when you make a differentiation between the countrymen and those who rule the country, the uniparty, right? So now back to the US dollar. There are things that I can see happening, right? One thing is the CBDCs, right? Russia is coming out with their own CBDCs. The US is working on it, and I believe they're gonna roll it out in ways. I think it's gonna fail, by the way. It's not. It's gonna fail tremendously, but I don't know when it will fail. It may fail on launch. It may fail in after 5 years. It may fail after 10 years or 30 years, right? Systems last for a long time until they cannot, right? But the reason is that, the thing is that many of these countries that are supposedly at odds with each other, coming up with the same control system on their own population through currency and through money. So you can now see that what I was mentioning, that waging war is a too expensive way of controlling a population, because waging war is a tool to get control over land, over resources, and most cases the minds of the people, right? So why would you go through that step if you can just control them directly, right? Because the control system is the software in your mind. It's not it's not the CBDCs. Your willingness to use the CBDCs or your necessity to use the CBDCs or your inability to resist the CBDC, that is the control system. The CBDC is just ones and zeros on computer. It doesn't matter. It has no power over you if you really think about it, right? So it's the battle of control systems. That's what we're looking at. And China has been a really good place to beta test, so to speak, if we're talking about software, to try out things. There are some countries that have been used historically to try out things, right? Or even states sometimes, they used to say, as California goes, so does the rest of the country, right? Well, as China goes with their unique systems of control, so does the rest of the world, right? Or as the US goes, when it comes to belief systems and politics, so does the rest of the world. That used to be the case. Now, what it boils down to, what all of this boils down to, right? So, first and foremost, whatever the BRICS come up with is gonna be opposed for some time, right? And that may mean that there will be a war on ideas of what they're proposing. If that's gonna be a gold-backed something, then you can bet gold will be demonized in the Western nations, right? So all I'm saying is you better stack up. Of course, I'm just saying this jokingly, right? But think for the future, right? And think cash, and think self-sustainability, and think community. And I think that's probably the last most important point, is that if these things get rolled out, wherever they are, I think the next backstop to it are states and states' rights to use other forms of payment for within the states. And I think that should be focused on more, instead of just always just complaining of centralization. Work on your own decentralized solutions, right? And that's why I have this duality when it comes to cryptos, when it comes to decentralized money, right? But you have to look at the projects. You have to look at why Bitcoin was forked into Bitcoin Cash, why Monero exists, why, you know, Pirate Chain or some of these other currencies exist, and where are they now, and who's taking over, who's controlling it. XRP, you know, what's happening with XRP lately. But you also have to watch out that whatever is too big will get adopted by the system, in the sense of the blob eats it. You know, somebody sent me a link, and if you're listening, please send it again, to a video where it had this idea of a system that's ever expanding and is consuming everything. In its path, it will find things that it will want to destroy, but things that are truly effective against it, it will not try to destroy. It will consume. It will make part of it. The blob will eat it and make it part of it. And that has been very true when it comes to the hippie movement, when it comes to the Occupy Wall Street movement, when it comes to any other movement, or left, right, it doesn't matter. It just consumes it, co-opts it, and it uses it itself against it. So you gotta watch out for that. And I'm gonna stop here, but there's probably some other ideas that we'll need to think about. So thank you for listening. Thank you for all the support that you have been showing with the likes and the shares, and the people on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Links will be below. Yeah, you make the channel go on for a long time. So thank you for all your help, and I want you to start doing those push-ups. Work on things that you can work on, right? Because whenever we're thinking about all of these big aspects, it feels out of your reach. but there's so many things within your reach, right? Have you tried, buying the compost from your local farmer with silver? I don't know. Have you? Or what about um, Zcash? Or what about something else? Or have you tried bartering for it? Have you tried building a community? There's so many things. Are you working on your upper body strength? Are you working your health on your health? There's so many things that you can do individually and inspire other people to do it as well. And there's practically no way how a big system can fight that. It's just like salt on this snail, slow moving blob that is consuming everything. So make sure you think about that, right? So get more optimistic, work on things, but also observe things. All right. Talk to you next time. Bye.